The Hall of Confrontation. The marble-floored conference hall in Geneva was packed with diplomats, journalists, and observers from across the globe. Flags of different nations lined the walls, shimmering under the bright lights. Yet the atmosphere was heavy with an invisible tension. This was not just another political forum. It was a battlefield of ideas, where words carried the weight of bullets, and reputations could be destroyed in a single phrase. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, who had now positioned herself as a vocal defender of Western values, stepped to the podium with a confident smile. Her voice rang through the microphones, clear and sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, let's speak plainly. Africa, in its current trajectory, risks collapsing under its own mismanagement. Without Western oversight, without our guiding hand, the continent cannot possibly govern itself. We have seen it in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, each claiming independence but moving only closer to chaos. The room stirred. Cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing the conviction with which she delivered the statement. To many in the audience, her words were nothing new, an echo of centuries-old rhetoric, but to others, it was a direct insult to the sovereignty of nations that had fought tooth and nail to free themselves from colonial chains. Sitting silently in the front row was Ibrahim Traoré, the young Burkinabe leader whose rise had sent shockwaves through Africa and beyond. His military uniform, though simple, carried a symbolic weight that contrasted sharply with Bondi's polished Western attire. His eyes, steady and piercing, did not flinch as Bondi's speech painted Africa as helpless, incompetent, and dependent. Bondi continued, her tone growing sharper. You speak of sovereignty, yet look at the corruption, the instability, the lack of democracy. The West invests billions, and what do we see in return? Failed states and endless conflict. Let us not romanticize independence when it only leads to suffering. True freedom comes with responsibility, and Africa has yet to prove it is ready. A murmur of approval rose from some Western delegates, but others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bondi had crossed an invisible line, her words echoing too closely the arrogance of colonial paternalism. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Slowly, Traoré stood up. The cameras swiveled toward him instantly, the air thick with anticipation. He walked to the microphone, his footsteps echoing like drumbeats. Without raising his voice, he began. Madam Bondi, you speak of sovereignty as though it were a gift, something to be granted or withdrawn by your hand. But sovereignty is not charity. It is the blood of our ancestors, the struggles of our people, and the dignity we will never trade. You speak of corruption, but who fuels it? You speak of instability, but who arms the rebels? You speak of failed states, but who benefits when they fail? The hall fell silent. Even Bondi froze, her confident posture suddenly stiff. Traoré's words were not shouted, but they carried a fire that spread through every corner of the room. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed in to capture his unwavering expression. This is not a classroom where Africa sits as a student waiting for your lessons. Traoré continued. We are not children. We are not experiments. And we will no longer accept lectures from those who preach justice abroad while denying it at home. The audience erupted, some with applause, others with gasps. The confrontation had just begun, but already the balance of power in the room had shifted. Breaking the silence, the applause lingered in the air, a sharp contrast to the shocked silence that had preceded it. Pam Bondi forced a smile, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her discomfort. She leaned forward at the podium, determined not to let the young African leader seize the moment entirely. Mr. Traoré, she said, her tone cutting. It is easy to make fiery speeches, but speeches do not feed people. They do not build schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. The West has poured resources into Africa, billions of dollars, and yet, we see little progress. Where does that money go? Into the pockets of leaders who claim to resist colonialism, while enriching themselves. Tell us, how do you explain that? A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Bondi's counterattack was sharp, accusing African leaders of corruption had always been the West's strongest weapon. Some nodded in agreement, while others waited eagerly for Traoré's response. Traoré did not hesitate. He stepped closer to the microphone, his voice calm yet unyielding. Madam Bondi, you speak of billions given to Africa. But do you also speak of the trillions taken out? Our resources, our gold, our uranium, our oil, siphoned away under contracts written in your capitals, not ours. You lend us money at interest while extracting wealth worth 10 times the amount. And then you ask why our schools are empty, why our hospitals lack medicine. The answer is simple: because the profits sit in Western banks, not in African homes. The crowd stirred again, the tension rising like a storm. Even some Western delegates glanced down, uneasy, as if the truth in Traoré's words exposed a guilt they preferred to ignore. Traoré pressed on. You accuse African leaders of corruption. And yes, corruption exists. But who offers the bribes? Who sets up the shell companies? Who provides safe havens for stolen wealth? When money is hidden, it is hidden in London, in Paris, in New York, not in Ouagadougou. The hall thundered with applause this time, louder and more defiant than before. Bondi's face flushed, but she tried to maintain composure. Still, the impact was undeniable. The young leader had turned the accusation back on its source. Let us speak plainly, Traoré said, his eyes scanning the hall. When you say Africa cannot govern itself, what you mean is that Africa does not govern itself according to your interests. You mistake sovereignty for servitude. But the age of servitude is over. It was a declaration that electrified the room. Students watching online in Dakar, Lagos, and Nairobi cheered through their screens. Journalists rushed to push out breaking headlines: Traoré defies the West at Global Forum. Pam Bondi, however, was not finished. Adjusting her microphone, she shot back. You talk about servitude, but what about human rights? What about democracy? You claim independence, but many African nations slide into authoritarianism. How can you speak of justice while silencing dissent? For the first time, Traoré's eyes narrowed, his voice carrying a sharper edge. Madam Bondi, do not lecture Africa about democracy. Where was your democracy when entire nations were invaded under false pretenses? Where was your respect for dissent when whistleblowers were silenced? When journalists were imprisoned? Do not speak as though human rights are a Western invention. Our people have resisted tyranny long before your constitutions were written. Gasps rippled across the hall. Bondi shifted uncomfortably, her composure visibly cracking. What was meant to be her moment of dominance had turned into a global stage for Traoré's defiance. The echo heard around the world. By now, the conference hall felt less like a diplomatic forum and more like an arena. Every exchange between Bondi and Traoré was met with reactions, cheers, gasps, applause, that made the event feel historic in real time. Bondi, sensing her grip slipping, tried to regain control. You are eloquent, Mr. Traoré, but words will not change the fact that Africa still relies on Western aid. Your rhetoric may stir emotions, but emotions cannot build nations. Traoré leaned forward, his voice firm, every syllable deliberate. You are right about one thing: emotions do not build nations. But neither does exploitation. Nations are built by dignity, by sovereignty, by the will of their people. And Africa has finally remembered its will. The words seemed to vibrate through the hall. Some delegates rose to their feet, clapping loudly, their applause breaking the boundaries of protocol. Traoré raised his voice, just slightly, enough to command full attention. You speak of aid as though it were a gift. But aid tied to conditions is not generosity, it is leverage. Aid that demands submission is not charity, it is control. If you want to speak of partnership, then speak of equality. But if you come with chains disguised as contracts, do not be surprised when we break them. The audience erupted. The applause was deafening. Reporters nearly leaping over each other to capture the moment. Bondi looked stunned, as though she had just realized. Her opponent's words would outlive the event itself. Traoré concluded with a line that would be quoted across continents. We will no longer beg for seats at your table. We are building our own. The hall stood still, then erupted into a standing ovation from African delegates, students, and activists in attendance. Even some Western representatives hesitated before clapping, recognizing the historical weight of what they had just witnessed. Pam Bondi, her expression tight, attempted to smile, but the damage was done. The confrontation she had initiated had turned against her, transforming into a defining moment for African sovereignty. Within hours, clips of Traoré's speech spread online. On social media, hashtags like #AfricaRises and #TraoréDefiance trended globally. In Ouagadougou, young people poured into the streets, waving flags and chanting his words. In Dakar, students replayed the footage in classrooms, their cheers echoing through hallways. For the first time in a long time, Africa's voice had not only been heard, but had silenced the voice that tried to undermine it. Pam Bondi had come to the stage expecting to expose Africa's weakness. Instead, she had unintentionally revealed its strength. And Ibrahim Traoré's reply became more than just words. It became history.